Okay, so we've seen so far the basics of simplifying surds, trying to make the number inside the square root as small as possible by factorising using square numbers. The other technique, the other thing we have to learn is called rationalising the denominators. And before we sort of really launch into this, we need to make sure we understand what these words mean. So first of all, let's start with the word on the right, denominator. What is the denominator? And I'm going to ask Heidi. Heidi, what's a denominator? Yeah, number on the bottom of a fraction, that's right. Or I'm just going to put the bottom of a fraction. Rationalising them means removing surds. So rationalising denominators means removing surds from the bottom of fractions. So we may have an example, I'll call this number 1, I know I didn't number them earlier on, but if we've got, for example, 7 divided by root 3. That is just deemed in maths to be not nice because it's got a surd on the denominator. It's deemed to be not nice. We don't want surds on there. We want to rationalise the denominator. And we do a little trick. Now, some of you may have come across what this is. Daisy. We will times it by root 3 over root 3. Daisy, what is the value of root 3 over root 3? What is root 3 over root 3 the same as? 1, yeah. Anything over itself, anything divided by itself is 1. We are timesing it by 1, written in a weird way. If you times anything by 1, you don't change its value. And Daisy chose the root 3 because that is what's on the bottom over here. And now, if we are doing that, let's just see what we get. When we times fractions, we times the tops and we times the bottoms. When we times the top here, 7 lots of root 3, and we can't do anything to that other than just write it down as 7 lots of root 3. On the bottom, I've got root 3 times by root 3. What do we get if we times root 3 by itself? Beth? Root 9, which is 3, yeah. So we have now no longer got a surd on the bottom of our fraction. And you may think, well, what's the point of that? There's more writing involved, and yes, there is. It's one of these things where mathematicians just don't like some things. They don't like surds on the bottom of fractions. Yeah?
If, for example, it would ended up being 9 root 3 on the top,
yep.
Would you then take out 3 as a factor of...
Yeah, so you're saying if the question had led us to 9 root 3 over 3, yeah. Okay, if that had happened, yes, you would have done some cancelling. You said 3 goes into that number 3 times, 3 goes into that number once, so you've got 3 root 3 on the top, you've got 1 on the bottom, we won't bother writing it down, we just leave it 3 root 3. Yes, exactly. Okay. So, if we look at another example, let's have a look at 4 root 3 over root 5. Here's another fraction. It's got a surd on the top and a surd on the bottom. We're not bothered by the surd on the top, but we don't like the surd on the bottom. We need to rationalise that denominator. And we times it by, and it's only the one on the bottom you times it by. You times it by the root 5 divided by itself, because root 5 divided by root 5 is just 1. It's just a weird way of writing 1 down, so we're not changing its value. And then on the top, we've got 4 times by root 3 times by root 5, which you can either write down as 4 root 3 root 5, like that, or you could write down, if you wanted to, as 4 root 15, and you'll find some books will write it down that way, some books will write it down that way. It doesn't really matter. And then on the bottom, root 5 times by root 5. What are we going to get from root 5 times by root 5, Charlotte?
Root 25, which is just 5.
Yeah, root 25, which is just 5. So either of these two would be acceptable answers. We've rationalised the denominator. There's no longer a square root there. Okay. Right, let's do another one. Okay, 4 on the top and 3 root 3 on the bottom. Liv, what are we going to times by here, do you think?
3 root 3? Or just root 3?
Yeah, it's only the root 3 we don't like. We have no problem with the whole number being on the bottom. So we're just times by the root 3 over root 3. It's the root 3 on the bottom we don't like. So on the top, we have 4 lots of root 3, which we just write down like that. On the bottom, right, if I cover this first 3 here up to start with, what is root 3 times by root 3? 3, yeah. And then this 3 is also here. And 3 times by 3 is 9. So I get 4 lots of root 3 over 9. So that root 3 there is that root 3 there. Okay? That root 3 has come from that root 3 times by that root 3. And that'll be the final answer over there. We all okay with that so far? Okay, moving on then. Another one. Getting slightly more complicated. So I've got 4 on the top and 2 plus the square root of 3 on the bottom. So on the bottom this time, I've got a plus sign. Does anybody know? We've got some hands up already. Callum, go on.
Times it by 2 minus root 3.
So I'm doing some red. 2 minus root 3 over 2 minus root 3. I guess the fact I've written it down means yes, you do. Can you explain why? Or would you rather not? Just don't know. Okay, let's just do it and we'll see if we can work out why. Okay, he's right. What we do here is we times by the bottom thing here, but we change the sign. Okay, so what we have done here is we use the denominator, but we have changed the sign in the denominator from a plus to a minus. That is what we have done. Now, let's look at this in 2 parts. Let's look at the top line first of all. The top line here is 4 multiplied by 2 minus the square root of 3. And I've written it in brackets. Okay, but that's what that's meant here. 4 times by that thing. If you're using brackets and multiplying, this means 4 lots of 2, which is 8. And I'm subtracting 4 lots of root 3. I can just write that down as 4 lots of root 3. So that's what I'm going to get on my top line. On my bottom line, my denominator, I've got 2 plus root 3 times by 2 minus root 3. So I will write that down in brackets. Now, we need to multiply those together. What technique, what skill do people use to multiply those together? Various people may say different things. Foil. Okay, if you know what foil means, that's fine. That would work. Any other methods? If you had come across at GCSE multiplying x plus 2 by x minus 4, what techniques would people maybe use? Emily?
Grid.
The grid. Yeah, I'm going to use the grid to start with. If you want to use foil, absolutely fine. But I'm going to use a grid because it works on so many things, and for some people it's easier. But if you don't want to use a grid, if you're happy using foil that you've been taught, absolutely fine. So, for the grid, I've got 2 and a positive root 3 in one of my brackets. My other bracket, I've got 2 and I've got negative root 3. And I'm doing a multiplication grid. In this box here, I'm doing 2 times 2, that's 4. In this box over here, I'm doing 2 times by positive root 3. Well, that's 2 lots of root 3. Down here, I'm doing 2 times by negative root 3. That's negative 2 lots of root 3. Over here, I'm doing positive root 3 times negative root 3. Well, root 3 times root 3 is 3, and a positive times a negative is a negative. So I get this. What will happen in my next stage if I'm using this grid method? Daisy? Yeah, these two here will cancel each other. It will always work out that these two are the same, apart from one is a plus and one is a minus. So effectively, those two cancel each other out. And I'm left with a 4 and a minus 3. And 4 minus 3 is 1. So the bottom bit here is just equal to 1. And it will always happen that if you choose this thing here, but change the sign in the middle, when you multiply the bottoms together, you won't always get 1, but these two bits here will always cancel out, and you will be left with no square root at all. So, putting our answer together, putting what we had for the top over what we have for the bottom, the top we worked out was 8 minus 4 lots of root 3. The bottom was just 1. If you're dividing anything by 1, well, you don't bother writing the dividing by 1 down. So I get 8 minus 4 lots of root 3. So anything else I could do to make that answer slightly better, slightly nicer mathematically? If you saw in a question at GCSE 8 minus 4y, what might you do as a next step? Yep.
Take 4 out of it.
Take 4 out as a factor. Yeah, here, if you saw that at GCSE, you may say, well, 4 goes into 8, 4 goes into 4, take 4 out as a factor. What do you times 4 by to get 8? 2. What do you times 4 by to get 4y? Y. So you'd do that. Well, you can do that over here. 4 goes into both of those bits. Take 4 out as a factor. 4 into 8, 2 times. What do you times 4 by to get 4 root 3? Root 3. The minus sign goes in there. So there you go for a perfect sort of final answer there. Okay? We're all happy with that? Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have about 12 minutes or so time just to have a go at some questions from the textbook. So they'll be from chapter 2 in the textbook, but I'm going to stop the video at this point.